people today. They could spend half their lives over 50. That's a lot of living. So it helps to have a wise friend and fierce defender in your corner. A friend like AARP. So your health lives longer.
This is just slow-mo karate?
Just slow-mo karate.
Your money lives longer.
I just bought that.
I just sold that.
And your happiness lives longer. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Join today.
Welcome to AARP Illinois' virtual event. It's so wonderful to have you with us. AARP is on a mission to connect with individuals across various communities, especially those aged 50 and above. We're here to listen, understand, and address the unique needs of you and your community as we age. Our goal is to enrich your experience by expanding our local activities, providing opportunities for you to discover and engage with all that life has to offer right here in your own community and virtually. As we journey through today's event, we invite you to consider joining our dedicated team of AARP volunteers. It's a chance to make a meaningful impact and help us better serve those 50 plus across the nation. Connect with us and be a part of this vibrant movement toward positive change. Welcome, and let's make this event both fun and transformative.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to In the Man Cave with Project Brotherhood Collective. My name is Cliff Morgan. I am one of the representatives of Project Brotherhood Collective here in partnership with AARP. And we're just here to have a discussion. I'm going to introduce or allow my co-host to introduce himself quickly.
Marcus Murray, Project Brotherhood.
All right. And then we have two gentlemen with us today who are both in the financial planning space. But we really want to set the stage for a conversation just around planning for the future, long-term care for Black men specifically, and things that we should be thinking about. And just kind of having this conversation, right? Like we hang out, we talk about lots of things, but these aren't things that we often talk about in a real serious manner. And we just want to make space for that today and share this information with folks broadly because it's important, right? We need to be looking for that future. Murray?
And then that starts us off. Why is it important? Why is it important that Black men need to understand financial planning and long-term care? Charles, John, what do you all think?
All right. Yeah, if we're leading off with that one, and I won't go too far because I obviously want Charles to add some color to this as well. But what I would tell folks first and foremost is a lot of the needs and a lot of the things that we need to be doing in those first few building blocks certainly are unique to Black men. Like I would tell this to any of my clients. However, I think the question becomes more relevant and pertinent for us because of historical factors around maybe distrust for a lot of institutions and, kind of how we've kind of been dealt with at kind of a macro level, throughout our history. Putting that to the side though, right? And given that this is a, 50 plus audience, right? I would say answering that question in a very direct manner might do that person a disservice, right? Because we got the gamut of 50-year-olds, right? We got some that are very high earners and some that have saved and some that maybe haven't and aren't as high earners. So it's really most important to kind of have someone meet that person where they are, right? And the other piece is it's kind of like, hey, I'm not a handyman, right? So I know when something needs fixed, I got to pick up the phone and call somebody, right? So, and I'm not a cardiologist. I'm not, all those things where I know where if something's wrong, I got to talk to somebody that I think has a little bit more expertise than me, right? So that's really going to be the first step I would have is understand what you don't know, right? And then, on your own, as you're kind of hearing things about, retirement planning and, now we're at this AARP space, right? Long-term care planning and things like that, right? If you are kind of reading up on things that really, you might have a little trouble discerning or figuring out, you can reach out to folks for free that can at least kind of unpack things in jargon that you understand and really kind of help crystallize what your next step should be. So I'll leave it there for Charles to kind of add in.
Well, John, thanks for laying the groundwork for this particular point of conversation. when I think about where we are right now, we can talk about, the history of Black men and where we've been and who we've been and all that. But I'll say this. I look at everything from this point forward as an opportunity. We have an opportunity to reassert ourselves in a way that I don't think we've ever had before. Whether it's life insurance, whether it's investment planning, long-term care, it's a new day for us in a large regard. And I think that it's almost incumbent upon, guys like myself and John to be vocal about what we do with people. I think that in the past, maybe I just haven't been as vocal about what it is that I do with people. I've had people say, "Oh, I didn't know you did that." I didn't know you did insurance. Oh, I didn't know you did this. And so we, when it comes to Black men right now, we have an opportunity to really just kind of step back onto the scene, especially as it relates to the Black family. That's the thing that I think is at peril right now. Where are we within the Black family? How do we really, really start to talk more about legacy building, legacy planning, what it means to look, generations forward? Where's my responsibility to my children's children, as the saying goes? So, I really love this conversation because it really can reframe how we're going to talk about things going forward. It's no longer, oh, we didn't do this and we didn't do that. Now it's, how do we do this? How is it best done? Not just one way, but what's the best way? We can talk about a myriad of different things and, factors that are involved in financial planning, but a conversation like this allows us to flesh it all out and really put a number of things on the table for us to take advantage of. So I love the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna jump in, Charles. I will say this, bro. I've been around you for years, at least 20 years.
Yeah.
It just came to me recently what you do. And that's that thing, it's about networking and it's about that conversation. These financial conversations, brothers ain't having it. You know, I don't know if it's when sometimes we get around each other and we're just so relaxed and happy to be, around each other and not even want to talk about money and things of that nature, but it is something we need to do. I'll give you an example. My grandparents raised me, and about 30 years ago, in the mid-90s, one of my neighbors came to me talking about financial planning and insurance, health insurance, or life insurance on them. I'm 25, 28 years old. I'm thinking, man, I ain't got time for that. He's like, no, you could pay $30 a month. I didn't understand generational wealth, and I didn't understand the importance of having that life insurance, so I didn't get it. Now I'm not saying using that. I'm not saying it's a financial gain. When people die, but sometimes that helps with that generational wealth. And then when we talk about long-term care, when does long-term care begin for Black men? Does it begin around 40, 45? When we start getting diagnosed with cardiovascular disease, high rates of cancer, high rates of everything. So when does that begin? And now that I'm getting to that age in my mid-50s, and we start talking about Medicare, and for people that don't know, Medicare is for people over 65 years old. Now they got A, B, C, and D. Do I need to start making investments now just to pay for that supplemental Medicare? And not, these are the things that we're talking about that we don't even know. So when we had conversations and advice from you two, it's crucial.
Yeah, no, that's huge, man. The fact that we are on here talking about these things, that's a miracle in itself.
That's step one, right?
Right. Yeah. And to your point, Charles, it's an opportunity, right? Like this is an opportunity that has been given to us to create a space for this conversation, and it needs to be had. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, Charles.
No. You're right. I appreciate you underscoring that. It's life insurance, long-term care specifically. I'm talking more about long-term care now with folks because, I'm going to be very blunt when I say this, and you'll know what I mean. Dying is the easy part. Right. When you're dead, you're gone. Right. Living after a significant illness, that's where it gets hard. Yeah. When you might not be earning money, and in fact, you're costing your family money. Yeah. And planning for something like that is absolutely critical. John, you guys know, when it comes to bankruptcies in this country, most of them are medically related. Most of them, whether somebody's probably had an accident of some sort, whatever it might be, but it will absolutely bury a family. And so if we're talking about putting checks in place where if something significant happens to the breadwinner, that family doesn't go under, that's a huge conversation to be having right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I could piggyback on that, one of the things that I always try and underscore to folks is, and you hit it right on the head, Cliff, about this being an opportunity. A lot of times I'm meeting with folks and they might be a little sheepish about what they have saved up or what they haven't done. And I kind of like, you know what? Hey, we're not going to worry about that. Like that's rearview mirror, right? Yeah. We're going to control what we can control, right? So that's one. And then, if you're coming to the table, maybe thinking you might need a certain amount of whatever, right? Or, knowing that you need to do something, but might not quite have the resources to do it, that should not lead to inertia and inactivity. And I think that's a lot of, like that kind of the paralysis of analysis, as they say, right? And then just being scared of like, okay, well, I don't have enough to, completely take care of the situation. I'm going to ignore it, right? Well, we don't want to do that either, right?
Yeah, ignoring that does not help.
Right, exactly. Because what's the alternative? I mean, to your point, Charles, is like, somebody is going to be paying for this, right?
Yeah.
Are you either going to be a burden to your family, or you know what? In the case of long-term care, you can, if you want to, spend down everything that you've built up over the years, and that gets to the whole generational wealth piece that we'll set to the side, right? Yeah. And then you can have the government coming in and saying, okay, well, hey, Medicaid will take care of you, but you're going to stay here. We're going to treat this and blah, 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 blah. You may not necessarily want that as well, right? And a lot of people don't realize that that's typically the alternative, right? To your point, Marcus. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of, kind of what it is. And they might mistakenly think that Medicare is going to take care of a substantial amount of these long-term care expenses in the future, right? So it's not just, just kind of being aware of it. And I will tell you, when you start talking about that age when we start really thinking about it, it's not only that, okay, by the time we hit our mid-40s, mid-50s, something probably happened, or someone told us, hey, let's get their colonoscopies, or, like myself now, I'm on high blood pressure medication as a 53-year-old. Like, I mean, that's life. But what it really is if we are fortunate enough to have had, a parent or two live into their golden years, and we have not so fortunately maybe seen them decline steadily, right? That's kind of the wake-up call, more so than, hey, I went to the doctor and they told me something, right? Because now it's like, oh man, I got daughters. I don't want my daughters having to go through this, right? I don't want it to be a pass the hat type of scenario, right? Because all of these issues are interconnected when it comes to, like I said, generational wealth and kind of thinking, beyond today and beyond this generation, and what that's going to do to that balance sheet, right? And what I want to leave for my kids. I'm thinking about what I want to leave for my grandkids. So I just wanted to add that point.
Yeah, and John, you mentioned quickly right now. I would love for you to kind of clear this up. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Medicare, right, and Medicaid. How does that work? What's the difference? You know what I mean? Right. Generally, not super detailed, but can you?
Just at a super high level. Medicare is essentially health insurance for seniors over 65. It's a government program. Can't remember which president it was instituted under, but that's not important. Like, that's kind of what you have to look forward to, absent anything else at age 65, right? Yeah. Medicaid typically is for folks that might have a little bit more financial insecurity. So it's not necessarily designed for folks that are older, right? But it is designed, it's more of kind of a government supplementary program for low-income individuals, right? Exactly, like a safety net, exactly, yeah. Right? And absent any other resources, if you also need long-term care, right? Medicare can help take care of some of those long-term care expenses, right? But, again, it's the government kind of dictating, what's what. And to really underscore kind of where your question is coming from, the misnomer is that, Medicare is taking care of a lot of this stuff, right? Medicare is for health insurance, not for long-term care. Now, there's a component that does cover some long-term care expenses for a finite period of time, right?
Right.
But it's not years and years and years and years. So when you look at your family history, right? Is it, hey, one day folks just don't wake up, or is it maybe I had a parent that had dementia, or whatever. Like is it, what's that family history look like? Because that could be a predictor of kind of how you're going to cross the finish line, right? So those are some of those things you want to kind of think about if you have a prolonged state of that. So
thank you.
Just to add real quick, Cliff, Medicare usually doesn't. There's 4 parts: A, B, C, and D, and sometimes vision, dental is not really covered. So the older you get, you need your teeth, or you need.
You see, I'm rolling.
Right.
Charles, you were gonna say something, and then I got a question for you after you make your comment.
Yeah, I was just going to mention how John just scared the crap out of me, but I'm cool.
Hey, you know what? It's I like to disturb but not scare, because we can fix this. Like we got that's a good part. But go ahead.
Yeah. My family history is huge. Just being able to look at what's going on right now in your own lineage. It'll kind of it can be a predictor of what's down the road for you to some degree. And I'm managing some of those things myself between my mom and my dad. So that hit home, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, my biological mother, she did pass away as a younger individual. My biological father, who since remarried, he'll be 83 this year. Oh, wow. And he's still back home in Detroit, so it's not like, I'm around the corner if something were to happen to him, but he actually had a urinary tract infection about a year and a half ago. And, those are nothing to play with when you get older, right? And what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of times it's not just treating that infection that's the issue. Sometimes it makes you a little loopy, right? So it can mimic some of the symptoms of of dementia. Now, thankfully, he didn't, exhibit any of that, but it also, it takes that recovery process takes a toll from a mobility perspective. So I say all this to say, I mean, I feel you. Like I got a kid in college. I mean, Cliff and I, we know, like our kids are around the same age. I got one at Howard now. I got a senior in high school. So, so we got to take care of that. And then, when I see the phone ring, it's pops or my mother or my stepmom, I'm hoping that's, it's just, hey, how you doing, right? You never know.
Yeah,
I'm going to hop on I-94 and shoot over there, right? So it really, it hits home. And unfortunately, these are scenarios that, just are amplified in the Black community if we don't address things early on and, put things in place where we know that our folks and our kids are taken care of.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you this, John. You just put me on a roller coaster of emotions.
Amen. Yeah. And we're in that sandwich generation as
we are the sandwich generation.
Sandwich generation, right?
Like I forgot you were from Detroit. Detroit is like my second city. I love Detroit. Monica Patrick, I love D.
Okay, all right. Yeah. And then I will say this, Cliff and I, we met at church, and like when they left to head to the DC area. I was about to say the only arguments we've ever had is about the Last Dance documentary. That's it.
That's right. Right. Home team.
Isaiah all day. But
I won't bring up the
I appreciate the shout. Yeah.
But then you sound me because you brought up Howard. I just got a bill from I got that house. I just got a bill yesterday from Howard. Like,
right. Yeah.
But I did have a question for you and Charles. Earlier you mentioned something, and I want to address this myth. You kind of touched on a topic that I hear brothers say a lot. I don't have the money to invest. I don't understand financial planning. I often talk to cats, and I'm just, talking about a family of 4. I remind brothers, when you go out to eat, if you go out to eat 10 times a week with a family of 4, you're probably spending an average $50 to $60. When you multiply that by 10, 15 times, you're spending $750 to $1,000 a month. Then, and I don't want to stereotype, because we have to be real careful when we talk about Black men. I don't want to make it seem like we prefer shoes over financial planning. The bottom line is we love to grind, we love to make money. And if we don't understand financial planning, we will spend money on material things. That's why we're the biggest consumers. But if there was a way that we can educate and empower cats to say, look, and I don't have these numbers, but I know $250 a month starting at a certain age can help you towards your retirement. So how do we address that myth of people saying, I don't have enough money to financially invest?
You know, one of the things that I think that we fight against more than anything else is this mythology that we have in our community about not talking about money. And when we don't do that, it disempowers us. It creates barriers between us where we're not able to be open about things and say, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. Would anybody else, looking at something like this? And the crazy thing is it's changing a lot. The internet obviously has had a lot to do with that, but certainly COVID was just this odd animal. But I find that people are a little bit more apt to really look into other things now in terms of financial planning and all of those things, more so now than before. But I think that if we're able to talk about things as a community, it'll break down the barriers. So Marcus, you mentioned, we don't necessarily like shoes more than we like financial planning. But here's the thing, we talk about shoes. We see shoes all the time. And it's as simple as that. If the conversations were, hey, I just bought gold, or I just bought some more, IBM, whatever the stock is, or whatever. If we're talking about those things, guess what? They become attractive. They become the topic. They become the discussion that we're normally used to having. But because that has been such a historic barrier for us, don't talk about money, don't talk about this, whatever. When we break that barrier down, then we can have those discussions more readily, and it changes the landscape. Now when we hanging out, having a drink, smoking a cigar, whatever it might be, now it's, yeah, I just talked to my guy. We were thinking about buying, a Tesla right now because it's so beat up, whatever the case may be. It's the conversation, and if we can break that barrier and start having a conversation, a lot of these things will start to solve themselves over time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with prioritization, right? When people say I don't have it, it's like, well, do you or don't you, right? But you know what? I will say this. Generally speaking, when I deal with clients, I'm not necessarily one that is strict about, I mean, if there's egregious things going on in their budget, I'll say something, right? Like, do we need to spend $5,000 a month eating out? Like, that something like that, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of tell folks, hey, you know what? Live life, do you, right? But if there was one thing that maybe you could just kind of ratchet down by a factor of a half, right? Or just eliminate it, it's not going to hurt you too much. Maybe think about doing that, right? Particularly if there's like a gap in, like their retirement planning, right? So a lot of times the retort is, if I don't have it, is like, well, you know what? Maybe you do, and here's some things that we can uncover to make that happen, right? But Charles, just speaking to the broader point, and I think this even goes beyond financial planning in my estimation. When we were in the house and COVID, with, to your point, being such a weird animal, I think when we emerged from it as a society, I think folks were more apt to kind of check in on, their peers, their loved ones, their friends, in a more meaningful way, other than, how you doing? Well, no, how are you really doing? Right.
Yeah.
And I think, for Black men, that's been extremely tough over the years, but I start to see that, and maybe COVID was a byproduct of that, or maybe just society in general, just kind of elevating the issues around, mental health and, just and wellness and those conversations not being taboo anymore. I think that's helped. So we need to capitalize on that. And my other thing is, in terms of meeting folks where they are, certainly this audience that might be looking at this is more kind of a little more seasoned, but understanding what's passionate about the folks that you're talking to. Like, I'll speak, to myself and my passion around, wealth building and financial education and literacy in my community, right? So I'm a board member of 100 Black Men in Chicago, which rolls up to 100 Black Men of America, one of the premier mentoring organizations in this country, right? So I actually help run, the financial literacy programs for our Chicago kids. I've been doing that for quite some time, right? Because, when you talk about the shoes, right? And yeah, let's just be real. We are over indexers and over consumers of a lot of stuff, right? Like when you talk about GDP, I'm not going to go into weeds about what that means, but
Sure.
one of the parts of that equation is C, which is consumption, and we put the capital C in C as a community, right? But hey, do you want to buy some Nike Jordans or do you want to buy some Nike stock? You can actually get some Nike stock for less, right? And now like starting ingraining that in their heads to start saying, okay, well, hey, you know what? It's kind of cool to like talk about portfolios. Now they can pull that stuff on their phone. Like I look at Mint, man. I was right here before. Look at that green line, bro. So
Yeah.
Like kind of having that being a little bit more cool. And I think kind of the confluence or the convergence of those factors, like us just being a little bit more open about kind of who we are and checking in on each other, and at the same time, just chipping away at these conversations. Like for our generation being taboo, it may not be so much for the younger generation. So we need to kind of capitalize on that, keep that ball rolling.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say in that, John, is kind of start small with folks, but then helping people build a consistency to a strong financial plan. And thinking about that too, and this is a question I'm gonna throw it at both of you guys as well. What advice would you give to somebody, a Black man at 50, right, who's just starting out? Like, what would you suggest for them to do to kind of start the ball rolling to prepare for that long term care or wealth generation for the next generation?
One of the things that I think that John and I provide people with, and they don't even know it going into it, is this ability to step back and really think about what it is you're trying to create. Oftentimes people don't even think about that. They're working, they're living, or what have you, and they're not really considering what it is ultimately that they're trying to build. And I think that this financial planning conversation that we've created, it gives people an opportunity to say, okay, what do I want to do? And I think that prioritizes to some degree the things that you do with your money. So for somebody who's starting right now, the first thing is, if you're 50 years old right now, my conversation with you is, what do things look like at 75? What does that look like for you? 25 years down the road, are you still working? Are you retired? How long have you been retired? Are you still in the same house? All of these things, these parts, they ultimately travel back to some kind of a number that we can attach to it. If by 75 years old, I'm retired, my kids are fully educated, my house is paid off, there are numbers to those things. Crazy enough, that number relates to probably your insurable number. We'll go into that another time, but But what we're doing is really breaking down the parts of your life that have dollar amounts attached to them. And when they are important enough to you, that's when you start aiming dollars at them. If it's important to you to make sure that your kids are educated or what have you, then making sure that you've put money into those avenues to do that, that becomes priority. When you haven't even talked about it, it's not even in your purview at that point. It's nothing you're even considering. So you're spending money, I'm buying this, I'm buying that, I'm having a good time, and that's great. But if you have not considered what it is that you want to see in 20 years, it'll just show up. And that's really what's happening. People are just dealing with what has shown up at this stage, and they haven't planned for it. What's the old adage? Failing to plan is planning to fail, right? We know that, but it's absolutely applicable in this situation. So I would say start where you are. Start with figuring out what's important to you. If you want to be, I need $5,000 a month when I retire. Okay, great. That's 15 years from now. Again, the math will do the math. It will take care of itself. It'll tell us how much we need to earn at a given rate over a given amount of time to get you where you need to be. A lot of those things are already figured out in software packages. I don't have to sit in the back of a room and crunch numbers anymore. My job is creating enough of a space for people to have the conversation confidently. That's all. All of the hard work's been done already.
Right.
My job is to make it easy for people to say, Charles, man, you know what? Bro, I'm 53, I'm 54. I really never had this conversation. Let's talk.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point of what you said. Both of you are just having a conversation. We just need to start the conversation. Yeah. Because once you start the conversation, and you said a software program, so and we'll get to this. So hypothetically, if you're telling somebody, yo, at 50 years old, if you're able to put up $1,500 a month into this entity, it'll grow to this much in 15 years. Now here's the situation, because we do have to understand lack of knowledge causes fear. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not picking on you, Charles, but I'm gonna pick on Charles a little bit. I've been around Charles, like I said, for 20 years, and we've never sat down and had this conversation. Now, it could be numerous of factors. We're in the same room, but we're talking about other things. The game is on regardless. So not having that conversation and not knowing it, and this is not on Charles or John, I'm gonna speak for me. I bring home the bacon. So when my wife said, yo, it's time for us to start talking to a financial planner, well, I'm not finna talk to no cat about my money. What can he tell me about my money? Like, you know, then who is it? Now, this is nothing on John and Charles, but I want to know how you all deal with this. Then who is it? God forbid if he don't look like me, I don't know if I really want to trust him knowing how my money works. And then if he does look like me, do I really want him to know how money works? He's gonna be about Murray done spent this money on this, or Murray ain't got this Murray, or Murray, you know, so it's not like a lawyer. So how do you all deal with that? And then are there any legal ramifications or legal laws that prevent you from discussing somebody's financial business?
Great question.
Well, that's a great.
And then there's
I don't want to.
doctors.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. That's a great question. I don't want to overgeneralize, right? But I will just say this: if you were to break my book of business down, and we separate single men from single women, right? I have an overwhelmingly higher amount of single women as clients.
Absolutely.
Right? Because they tend to listen better and are a little bit more open to receiving advice than men. So that's not a black and white thing. That's kind of a man-woman thing, right? So, and then a lot of times, and not always, you know, when I am working with couples, right? You know, more often than not, the male takes the lead, right? But that's actually changing, right? You know, for a number of factors, right? But that's again, not to over generalize, but you know, the mistake a lot of folks make in kind of assuming that, hey, I got to direct this whole conversation toward the man is like when you leave, like the woman's actually the one making the decision, right? So I try and make sure I'm checking in. Like if it's a married couple, I'm checking in with both of them, and I just say right up front, you know, how involved do you want to be in this process toward helping, you know, put a plan together and put a roadmap together? Because some are more like, hey, you know, I'm cool. I want to kind of be in it, and some aren't so much, right? But I always look very upfront, and this is something by law I have to tell folks: you guys are still individually clients of me and a collective, right? So I'm not going to share personal information about accounts in your husband or wife's name, right? Like I can't do that, right? There could be some joint stuff, right? Mm-hmm. We can talk broadly about what's there, you know, when we're having a group conversation, right? But these are the things that we have to kind of make sure that we. I'm getting a little feedback here. Are you guys hearing that? Yeah, I got a little feedback. But these are the things that we have to make sure that we just lay up front. So that sets the expectation, right? And you know, getting to the point of, you know, hey, I don't want this guy talking to me about my money. I think when you kind of, you know, allay that fear early on to say, hey, you know what, this is really about, because really what's really underlying it, it's fear, right? Yeah. It's fear of that person saying, hey, maybe I didn't do enough, or you know, like it might be a little twinge of embarrassment, right? So even for folks like in their early 50s, you know, we still got one more economic cycle, if you will, before retirement or retirement age, right? So that's still enough time when you're talking about 10, 15, 20 years to really put something in place where if we don't have the resources now, we got enough time to maybe, figure out a plan to make that up, right? But inactivity is not an answer, right? So we do what we can while we can as we continue to bridge those gaps. So hopefully that helps. Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Marcus, you said something I wanted to follow up on. I think the crux of the matter with when it comes to the sharing of information is ethical. It's ethics. That's what we're dealing with at its core, And I think that there have been a lot of unscrupulous people in this business, in times past, and it's left just a bad taste in people's mouths to some degree. So they get a little pensive when it comes to talking to people like John and myself about their money. But it all comes down to being an ethical representative. I can't share information about clients and all of those kinds of things because it really just comes down to just being a stand-up person. But that's going to speak to your ultimate, commitment to this work and how it, your reputation and all of those things and how dedicated you are to really building that. But I don't know. I've never had an issue like that come up, but I feel like as an advisor, everything that a client tells me is confidential. It's not something that you that I would even want to put on the street like that per se. So maybe that's just a personal penchant, but I'm hoping that everybody operates in that regard.
Yeah, and
let me throw this one point in.
Yeah.
So where you have to be careful, and obviously when you've been doing this job as long as Charles and I have, really issues are exacerbated when we have clients that are going through a divorce, right? So we've been there, right? So that's when. When one of them tells me, and a lot of times, you build personal relationships with these folks. You become friends with them, like those commercials back in the day where the financial advisors at the kids' wedding, like that. I thought that was a little hokey, but doing this long enough, you do become part of the family, right?
I've been to a couple weddings.
Yeah, right. Because they wouldn't be sending them to college without or paying for that wedding without what you did. Yeah. Right? You're probably the most important person there. But that said, if a spouse approaches me and say, "Hey, I'm separating from blah 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 blah," the first thing I say is, "Well, hey, it's unfortunate. I hope you guys are okay or can kind of come out of this because I consider both of you my friends, but understand that your confidentiality is going to be protected throughout this process, as I will have to do the same for him or her, right?" So, and again, it kind of speaks to even though it's kind of that if you're an ethical person with scruples. It's almost unsaid that you have to say it, right? But I think it's comforting just because of the fact that, there's just been this historic, kind of mistrust of institutions, and unfortunately, a few bad actors in our industry have contributed to that.
Yeah. So go ahead, Clinton.
Let me drop this real quick, just in that, right? Because I think that's really important in talking about how do you find a financial, advisor, right? Like I know. AARP has some tools on their website, right? They have a interview and advisor tool and stuff like that. But then they also have things like in talking about, being that 50-year-old and trying to plan for 65, right? Like they've got a retirement calculator. So they've got a bunch of stuff out there. And for folks who are interested in or in need of finding a financial advisor, like what are things that you would say people should look for? How would you suggest that they go about it? And I know that's kind of a tricky question because you're both advisors, right? Like, we can't do a commercial per se, but, what are things that people should be, looking for or asking as they are vetting folks to handle their finances?
I would say start with your immediate network. The reason that I'm here on this call right now is because of my immediate network, and I think that that's probably going to be the way most people do this. Commercials and all of those things, those are probably okay for the larger organizations that, that folks work for, what have you. But when it comes to being the person boots on the ground, it's networking. I would say that if I look at my book of business right now, easily 98, 99% of it is probably from my natural network, you know, in some regard. I mean, there have been some call-ins and some, you know, referrals and things like that, but still a referral is somebody that knew you and decided to talk about you. And that's just how my business has been built over the years. I've never really been big on advertising per se. I don't put out a whole bunch of stuff and all of those kinds of things. What I do is communicate to people that my job is to help people who are just like them. So who do you care about? Who do you care about right now that if something happened to them, it would hurt you? Let's talk about that person. Should they be having a conversation with me? You know, so, and I said this earlier and I meant it. I think a lot of this is incumbent upon me as an advisor. And I guess even having this conversation now, it really puts that ball back in my court. And I'm thinking maybe I need to do a better job at communicating to people what it is I do, you know, what it is that we handle for help people think through. This goes back to something that Marcus was talking about Black men and how we internalize this whole conversation. I am not a dictator. My job is to not take your money and do whatever I want to do with it. My job is to facilitate the conversation of, hey, what do you want to see happen? How can I help you? If you want to go buy a bunch of stock, now granted, there are a lot of ways to buy stock now, and people are, you know, on Robinhood and, you know, all these other sites so they can do that themselves. But if you're really looking for some things that are a little bit more avant-garde, maybe a little bit more advanced, let me show you how maybe some other folks who have been doing this for a while, let me show you what they're doing. It's all in it. It's how you couch the conversation with people. You know, you got to make people feel like they're in the right place at the right time with the right questions, and you got the answers. That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah. Not much to add to that other than, you know, ask someone who you trust that, you know, that may be working with someone, right? For sure. Because we do this in every other, you know, aspect of life, right? Like, I know what I can't do well, right? So I outsource and I get new referrals from folks that, you know, they've done a good job for that person, right? Yes. I will say this though, one of the myths, because we talked about myths earlier, Mark, is that we want to shatter is that it is an expensive process to hire a financial advisor. That's not necessarily true at all, right? You know, a lot of times recommendations and analysis can be done in support of, you know, however ultimately that relationship you know, flourishes, right? You know, now for people that may have a very complex situation, and for me, I'll just say the bar that I set typically is for folks that, you know, maybe business owners or maybe have, you know, money coming from maybe some complex trusts and family limited partner, like, you know, like if their situation requires me to spend a lot of time with their accountants and attorneys who are getting their money for their time, I will charge them for that analysis if it's you know, pretty complex. But for that person now, like the audience that we're primarily speaking to now, maybe that late 40 or early 50s person that might just really need some very targeted and focused retirement planning. I mean, to Cliff's point, in addition to the tools that are out there that can kind of help them do this themselves, right? You know, just having another set of eyes on it to just kind of say, okay, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that kind of a thing, right? And then, you know, ultimately, you know, you may do business with them in terms of letting that person manage assets for you. Or if we see a risk that needs to be mitigated, you may hire that individual in not just the capacity as financial planner, but then maybe an agent that could, you know, help mitigate that risk through some type of risk management or insurance product, right? So, so yeah, just thinking, oh man, I gotta, you know, drop a couple $1,000s just to bend this guy's ear, you know, that's not necessarily the case.
That's what I want to ask. First, I want to give you all a compliment. I didn't realize you all have to be like social workers, nurturers, psychiatrists.
Over this last one, you know,
when you talking to him about his money. You know.
That's the job.
right. Yeah, I got skills. But I want to piggyback on something you said down the line before I forget though. Cliff, let's talk about trust versus will. You know, that's the new hype thing right now.
Yep.
You all said something. You mentioned something, John, about payment. How does it actually work for the brothers watching this? If I'm 50 years old and let's say they have an extra $1,000 to spend, How does it work with you guys? Do they pay you up front? What is that process like to get a financial advisor? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it wouldn't. So I will say it depends, right? So it's really going to depend on that engagement, right? So, like I said, for most individuals, if they just want targeted, like retirement analysis, I personally am not going to charge them for setting up a meeting and just kind of getting a sense for, hey, what are your goals and things of that nature, right? But you move from, okay, here's the roadmap to implementation, right? And that's how, folks like Charles and myself, that's how we get compensated, right? Because the hope is, and again, sometimes I'll have this conversation knowing, hey, I may not get compensated for this conversation, monetarily until maybe years down the road, right? But then that's when you pivot to the question that Charles answered. Well, you know what? Hey, if you found this exercise beneficial, who do you care about that would hurt you, right? If they didn't have a similar conversation, right? And then you have that conversation with them. But what I would say is, typically folks approach the marketplace because they have some type of material event that is going to address a pain point of either risk management or money's in motion, right? So when funds are in motion, that's typically how we get paid, right? Now, depending on the types of platforms that ultimately we manage assets for folks on, right, that may dictate a certain fee structure. Some people might need very, very detailed, active money management. And in that case, I would charge them a percentage, as that grows, right? So it's in everybody's best interest to make sure their accounts do well, right? But in certain circumstances, it might be kind of more transactional, kind of one-off type of thing, right? Well, hey, you know what? I just want to buy a few stocks or mutual funds or ETFs or whatever the case may be, and I want to just kind of set it and forget it, right? So on that transaction, there may be some type of commission, right? But even in doing that, it's not like, okay, hey, you know what? Okay, goodbye. I had this transaction. No. It's, I promise folks, hey, if they're putting money in my pocket, what you're also paying for is me to routinely reach out to you, review it, make sure that we understand that, again, there are no material changes to your situation that might alter the course of what I told you before, right? Because if that's the case, then we just kind of we come back to the drawing board and then we recalibrate, right? So I'm not that I'm not giving you a direct answer, but the fact of the matter is there are multiple ways that we get compensated in our business. And the thing is now, to Charles' point about ethics and disclosure and all that kind of stuff, when we started in this business, a lot of that was just kind of in the background. Like, you got to be upfront with folks now about, what's happening, right? And they sign all types of disclosures. Hey, do you realize, your guys will get compensated for this and that sort of thing, right? So even when you like roll over, let's say you left an employer and you roll over 401k, we got to document, hey, what fees were you paying over there? Even if it's going to a platform where there's less fees, right? Or more active management. Like, so the environment now is as pro customer, if you will, per client, I like to say clients versus customers, pro client as it's ever been. And that's really a good thing. And we need to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Earlier this year, my firm took a real hard stance on how we're going to engage people going forward. Previously, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I got a couple bucks I want to invest. Yeah, okay, I'll start the account or what have you. And we're fee only advisors, so we don't take commissions on anything. At this stage, we've chosen to implement a hard gate, if you will, and that is we engage you as a planning client. And that means that upfront, we're going to require that you hire us to be your advisor. Now, that can mean different things to different people. It can mean that you literally want us to do everything, or it can mean that we are just the conduit for you to do the things that you want to do, whatever that means. But we're gonna have a conversation up front, and it's going to be broad enough where I understand and you understand exactly what you're hiring me to do. You're hiring me to grow the money over, a length of time, what have you. And we've talked about risk tolerance, and we've talked about goals, and we've had the whole conversation, because that's, from a compliance standpoint, that's where we're choosing to be. We've had the conversation. You know exactly what we're doing, and and again, this is not a dictatorship, so we're doing this together. But I think that hard gate is something that we chose to do because we don't want people to feel like, I'll just drop some money on Charles and then, see what happens later on. And I don't think that that's the way I want to operate as an advisor, because it leaves too much ambiguity out there. And so moving forward, there will be a charge for us, at least. And our initial fee for a planning client is $1,500. That might be too expensive for some people, and I get that. But for those who are willing to invest in what it is, I believe that we do really well. Our pledge is that particular investment will be more than made up for as we go along. So there is an upfront cost, and I'll be honest with you. At first, I felt a bit of a way about that. Some people who may not want to pay that up front, but you know what? It really, really creates a situation where people who pay it are serious about what it is that we're doing.
True. That's true.
If people don't pay for things, they don't care. It feels kind of cheap. When they put something up front, now they're engaged.
Yeah, put that skin in the game.
Skin in the game. So that's where we are right now. And it varies. If to your point, John, if it's something super complex, you got a couple companies and you've got a lot of different moving parts, that plan might take a while. And for that, we're going to ask that you compensate us for creating that plan.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be crazy, but it will be commensurate with the work that's required.
It'll be fair. Right.
It'll be fair. It'll be fair. Absolutely. So I'm okay with that now. It took me a little while though, because I felt like it probably cut off some people, but that's where we are right now. And I'm okay with that.
Let me ask you this, and I'm gonna try to throw some of my real life scenario in there. Besides the fact that I feel as though I'm a strong Black man, very attractive, and all that. I'm not as cute in the face and thin in the waist as I used to be. So I done picked up some pounds.
Ain't none of us
that. I'm talking about this all the time. I done suffered a couple heart attacks. That's just born with it. But besides that, because I'm getting to the point. So there's brothers out here that, so like me, I know if I live, and I think I will, another 20, 25 years, hopefully I go before my wife, because I don't want to take care of nobody. I need her to take care of me. But we talk about that. And as I think about easing her burden, meaning, I really don't want to have to change my diapers or things of that nature. But if we're just talking, and we're not talking about hospice now, we're just talking about dental, vision, prescriptions. As a supplement to whatever insurance I have, and then plus Medicare, I'm estimating for a couple, I might need an extra $2,500 a month just to make sure I'm living a quality of life in terms of my health, mental, dental, and vision. Are there, and I know when I'm going to ask, there's going to be a higher risk. Are there vehicles that I could start putting money in now, that, let's say in 10 to 12 years, that's going to give me that return of that $2,000 or $2,500? And I'm speaking specifically, I just want the money for, healthcare supplements as opposed to vacation homes and all that. Are there vehicles that allow me to do that within 10 to 15 years, so to speak?
I can definitely jump in on that one. So yes. There are health savings accounts and health reimbursement accounts and things of that nature that enable you to do that. And let's not overlook a really critical piece in terms of those types of accounts. They are tax favorable, right? One of the things that I always tell clients is, at a minimum, I will do, one of two things. I will give you an idea of how to grow your money more safely than you currently are, right? The other thing is I can probably put some type of scenario in front of you that is going to be more tax efficient than how you're currently operating, right? Well, whatever that looks like. A lot of times it's a merging of those two things, right? But to your point, yes, there are. And a growing field, if you will, or growing segment of financial planning now that really wasn't even as prevalent, 20, 25 years ago, is health care planning in retirement, right? So it's not just, hey, I want to make sure I got enough stuff to do my lifestyle stuff, right? And, hopefully we can travel. And, when you kind of break retirement down, and this is really probably more for Gen Xers, right? It's not as much like how our parents, maybe our grandparents, where it's like, you work maybe 1 or 2 jobs, you got the gold watch, hopefully, you're retired at 65 and, but you went on the glory at 70, right? So but you might have had a pension for a few years. Obviously that became a model that wasn't going to be sustainable as people were living longer and things like that, right? So now, more of us are hitting the finish line relatively healthy. So you might, during that go-go phase of retirement, I'll call that ages like maybe 65 to 75, you want to do some of the lifestyle stuff while you kind of, mobile enough to get around and do it. And then after 75, you're like, okay, I'm good if the grandkids see me every now and then, blah, 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 blah. But it's not just planning for the different phases of retirement as it relates to your lifestyle. Like I mentioned before, now there's this whole push now to really define, okay, what from a health care planning standpoint should I be doing to make sure that those dollars are there in a number of areas, long-term care. And that's kind of an easier one because, hey, let's put some long-term care coverage in place, right? But when you start talking about out-of-pocket costs and things like that may not necessarily be covered in, whatever supplemental plan you might have to Medicare or whatever the case may be, let's try to at least create a more tax favorable pool to get at those funds. Because the alternative is, okay, well, I got to take money out of my IRA maybe if I'm lucky enough to have one of those. And, tax money, unless it's a Roth IRA, they're the first one to knock, right? No, we want our cut first, right? So setting up health savings accounts and things like that. And you can do that on a really systematic, small amount routine basis, kind of like the same philosophy that has enabled folks to save into retirement accounts and IRAs and things like that. You can set up those types of tax favorable accounts that will enable you to use those funds for that purpose in the future.
Yeah, that's good. That's all I'm trying to do is leave the wife and the kids, in clear hands. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm gonna tell you, I definitely want to get another 30 years. Once my love making ability stops, I'm good. Take my money, take everything else.
Hey, look,
I have a target age in my head. Like,
science is on our side, brother.
That's small more years left.
Science is on our side. We got a little while to go.
Hey, man, that's my motivation, Jack. For living.
Let's keep it real.
Is there something they should do before they come see you? Should they journal their weekly activities, what they spend money? What would help them help you?
I wouldn't require anybody to do anything. I think putting precursors in front of those kinds of things prevent people from taking a step. My thing is come as you are, and then we can talk about what's important as the things come up. Long-term care is it's been around for a while, but it's got a couple different flavors, if you will. So there are these standalone classic long-term care policies, and the knock on them historically has been it's kind of a use it or lose it type of a thing. You can put all of this money into long-term care, and if somebody drops dead and they never use it, that money's just gone. And so insurance companies had to figure out, okay, well, how do we create the scenario where that doesn't happen? And so you've got other types of vehicles that have been created to affect long-term care. Insurance policies themselves have been really, really, really massaged over these, specifically these last 10 years, to include long-term care riders along with them. So if I've got a $500,000 death benefit, if something happens to me, I might have the ability through the long-term care rider to reach into the death benefit of that policy and use some of that money now to help me along the way. So it's been those kinds of things that have really broadened this conversation. So to your point about, is there something out there for like a manual of sorts? I don't particularly know of a physical manual, but I will tell you that I am a manual. And to the degree that you are willing to sit and have a conversation with me, I'm going to tell you what's out there to the best of my ability. And I'm not going to speak over your head about it. We're going to talk like, eye to eye, knee to knee, and I'm going to use language that you can understand. If this happens to you, this will be there to pay for it. So yeah, it's always coming back to that for me. It's always coming back to the willingness to sit down and have a conversation. But again, if the ball is in my court, then that means I got to be willing to be more vocal about who I serve, how I best serve them, and really, really put that message out there, because the reason we're here now is, Black men, we gotta be more informed about what's available to us. And if I spend all of this time in this industry, it's incumbent upon me to share that with men who look like me.
Cliff, before because we got about 3 to 5 minutes left. I know this is semi off the subject, but I think it's important, as he just said what he said. Well, Charles said what he said. If you all could break this down just in 30 seconds, what got you interested in this field, and how can more brothers get involved in it? Because if we don't have brothers like you that are servicing people regardless of their race, this is not a field that we hear about going to college. 70s, 80s, baby, we had doctor, teacher, lawyer. So we didn't hear about this. So there's a need for me. Just as we want more Black men in corporate America and healthcare and everything, we need more brothers like you all who make people feel comfortable to talk about the money. How did you all get involved real quick, and what can brothers do, young people, how can they get involved in providing these services?
Okay, so I can lead with this one. Before I get into that, though, I did want to give you one piece of information on like the long-term care. There's a really cool app that Genworth has. Just go to App Store and just put Genworth cost of care. And what that will do is it'll kind of tell you, hey, what's around the corner if I don't do anything, right? Like you put your zip code in, here's what it's going to cost to take care of myself or someone take care of me. So that's a good one. But
Can you spell that?
So like the company Genworth, Gen and then Worth, WORTH, right? Genworth cost of care. Right. So yeah, check that out. That's a really useful thing. I carry that app on my phone just to not scare people, but to disturb them. Right? And we're having this conversation. But real quick, two main things. So I was an economics major in college. So I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm a Harvard guy. I went played a little ball up there, but like economics was my undergrad, right? And going even back before that, I just kind of, like money kind of makes the world go around. That was kind of like, that's just kind of that's been the thread of all my career. I was in corporate finance for a little while. I did consulting after business school, and I helped actually serve financial services companies. So that's how I really got interested in the career. But even beyond the helping people and helping bridge wealth gaps in my community, because I care about my community, the lifestyle that the profession affords is pretty cool too. So, hey, I was very fortunate to have a very active father. A lot of our brothers don't have that, right? But, even though he worked his butt off, he found a way to get to all my basketball games and track meets and all that kind of stuff. And I said, for my kids, I want to be not only that person, but the guy that can, be on the field trips, all that kind of stuff. So we work a ton of hours and we educate ourselves and perfecting our craft, but at the same time, we choose those hours that we work, and we choose how we want to show up for our communities and our families, right? So this opportunity to be in a field where we're helping people and can show up the way we want to for our families made it a really great career choice for me.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. That story is far better than mine because I kind of fell into it. When I graduated undergrad, I graduated in the late 90s, so it was kind of weird from an economic landscape, and I was going to go into a classic rotational management program with a bank. And guess what? They were in a hiring freeze when I graduated. So I got a buddy that said, hey, you should come over here to what was then Kemper Mutual Funds. And that's where I started as just a inbound call guy. And then I got licensed and all of those things. And then I eventually became what we call a wholesaler of mutual funds and annuity products. And so my job was much like that of a pharma rep before brokers. So I went around to different brokers showing them products and services that we offered. And somewhere around 07, 08, I decided, hey, you know what? I need to not do this for them, and I need to be that guy. I need to be the one behind the desk who's able to, again, to John's point, spend his time with his family and do all of those wonderful things and not travel the region as much as I did. So it was kind of a progressive approach for me. It wasn't something I set out to do, but I will tell you that all of those earlier years I spent in financial services, I was the go-to person for, family or friends who wanted to know something about anything. Hey, what do you know about this? What do you know about that? And at that point, I really couldn't do too much to help. I can kind of tell you where to go or what have you. But when I made this transition, I became that person immediately. That all of my friends, you asked me about your 401k before, let's talk about it now. You asked me about the IRAs before, let's talk about it now. Life insurance, let's talk about it now. And I will never, ever, ever downplay this. My natural network has shown up tremendously in my career. All of these people I went to school with, friends from years and years ago, my book is heavily network influenced. And I'm proud of that because it tells me the kind of people that I grew up with and the kind of people that I associated with in undergrad and beyond. So I kind of fell into it, but it's the best thing that I could have ever done. So I'm very, very, very happy about that.
And Charles, I'm going to
just
say
give it 10 quick seconds, right? The good part is you don't have to have a formal financial background and discipline. I think those that actually excel in this career are those, when you talked about it, Marcus, we wear a bunch of hats now, man. We're psychiatrists, we're counselors, we're coaches. So when you can show up for people like that, I think that's really what makes you successful. So go ahead, Cliff. I'm sorry.
No, Charles, you were saying that, your network has shown up well and it says something to you about those people. But I would flip it and say, it really says something about you, right? That all of those people in your network have trusted you with their financial planning and financial future. So kudos to you, bro, because that's again, from what, Murray was talking about, like that's part of the challenge. The trust factor. Who can I talk to about my money and my finances, my future, right? I don't want people to know my business, but people are clearly saying to you, Charles, they trust you with that information, right?
Thank you for saying that.
That's a blessing for sure, bro. And again, we're wrapping up on time here, but I do want to go back to something that Murray mentioned briefly, and if you can give like quick overview, high level, will versus trust. What is that, right? Like people are talking about these things. These are investment strategies, like it's tax savings, probate court, all of these things get thrown out in these conversations. Can you clear that up a little bit for folks?
Living trust.
So now the one big myth, because we talk about myths again, is that these are great tax strategies a lot of times. That's not usually the case, right? A will, so first of all, if you have neither, somebody's going to get paid, either the state attorney before you pass away or the probate attorney, when you leave this mess for your loved ones, right? So what these vehicles like a will and a trust do is just give a little bit more order to the transfer of your property at a high level, right? A will can say, hey, you know what, little Johnny gets this, my kids get that, whatever the case may be. And when we have, and I won't just say this is unique to the Black community, this is like society in general. We got a lot of blended families and second marriages and, all that stuff that's not clean where, you got the husband and the wife and they have these kids and everybody's in wedlock and, traditional, because I don't want to knock anyone's lifestyle, but just traditional, right? That underscores the need to really dictate, what your wishes are and who gets what, right? Now, what a trust will do, just at a high level, is kind of shield all this from the public, right? So if you get back to the, I don't want folks in my business things, think of it that way, right? So you set up a trust, and the trust can give a little bit more specificity around the instructions as to how things are passed on. So if I want to give little Johnny some money, well, he's not going to get that money until he finishes college, right? And just at a very, very high level, there are two types of trust. One that's revocable, meaning you could change it in the future, right? Or irrevocable, meaning once it's in there, that's it. Like the dictate, like you better be darn sure that the people that you want to get your stuff, get it. And I will say this, and I'll kind of leave it at that. The one thing about the irrevocable trust, a lot of times, is it moves those assets out of your estate. And that can be very meaningful if when you pass away, if you've amassed enough stuff, right, the government's going to come in and tax what you got, right, over a certain, threshold, right? So that's one effective tax strategy, but that doesn't really take into account most people's situation. It's more the orderly transfer of your assets, making sure that folks who you want to get stuff, get it. And then if there's other instructions around how they receive it, those are carried forth. Charles, did I leave anything out? You can jump in.
I think the biggest issue at stake really is probate. I think avoiding probate is probably the thing that people are going to want to do more than anything else. All of those things that John mentioned are absolutely important in deciding which way to go. I would say that if you have any meaningful amount of assets, there's going to be something that will be transferable, and probate court is not fun. That is where the county makes their money. And so to the degree that you can pay that, $2,000, $2,500, whatever it costs upfront to do a living trust, it will more than make up for itself later on, because probate will double that at the very least. It'll double that.
Very least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
sometimes tenfold.
Exactly.
Well, I want to say this. As we come to end, I want to thank both of you all. I'm going to let Cliff close it out, and if you all have something final to say. I want to thank both of you all for coming out. We're running out of time. This is definitely something we need to do again. The information on it was crucial. As we go around and end it, if you all would like to give some information, John and Charles, on how to reach out to you, and then we'll throw it back to me and Cliff and close on out.
Okay. Go ahead, Charles.
Sure. Charles Clemens. I can be found at Lexus Wealth Management, www.lexuswealth.com or charles@lexuswealth.com. Reach out. Let's have a conversation, and we can go from there and figure out what is the road to travel.
All right. So John Anderson, I put my name and my website in the chat. So you might see the OPPINC and say, what is that, right? So one of the things about Equitable Advisors is it allows certain groups of individuals to operate as sort of a mega practice, if you will, right? So myself, along with a predominantly African-American group of certified financial planners, we operate as a DBA called Optimal Planning Partners. So OPP, pretty memorable, right? So a lot of times in my email signature, you see John at the OPPINC. But the way to get it, to find me and my group, again, is www.theoppinc.com.
Thank you. And I'll say before Cliff, I enjoyed this conversation. Brother starts thinking about how you spend your money, maybe cut back on some fast food. We should be eating healthy anyway, and that money we spending on fast food, let's find a Charles and a John and invest it, because we want to live longer lives. We want to be taxpaying citizens, and we want to be there for our family. And you know what I want to do until I can.
I ain't mad at that.
Yeah, not at all.
Hey, look, that's the best way to go. But look, as we're wrapping it up, again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us for this conversation. Thank you to AARP for hosting the conversation and sharing this information. Black men. Our future is still ahead of us. Our families are dependent on us. Our communities are dependent on us. Let's make sure we step up, or continue to step up. I'm going to say it that way, because it's not like we're not stepping up. Let's continue to step up, plan for the future, plan for our families, and have more of these conversations and take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us. So thank you to everybody. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yes, sir.
Guys, thank you so much for the opportunity.